family was having their nightly devotional on the fifth commandment, honor your father and mother. And the mother asked the kids, is there a commandment that teaches us how to treat our brothers and sisters? The oldest boy answered, yeah, thou shalt not kill. Welcome to Central Baptist Church and the Fellowship Sunday Morning Bible Study. Today we will finish answering the question, where do Baptists come from? And we're going to answer a question that went along with that, where did the BMAA come from? Families fight and families get back together, and they fight and they usually get back together again. It seems like Baptists are a lot like families. Perhaps that's why there are so many kinds of Baptists. Baptists often separate not by doctrine, not because of doctrine, but because of practice. And historically, divisions have occurred because of differences over the interaction between churches. That is, the role of the association that is composed of churches. So let's look at associations and modern Baptist associations. Last week we looked at the origins of associations briefly, and now we're going to look at some modern Baptist associations. An association is a group of churches that cooperate in order to discuss doctrinal issues or perform a greater ministry than one church could do on its own. Let's suppose that a church of 100 people want to start a mission. Well, a group of 100 people probably cannot afford the salary of a missionary, and they're probably having a hard time finding the money for the salary for their pastor. But if you take 10 churches of 100 members and put their finances together, well, they could easily support a missionary. If they do, that's an association. Associations sometimes cooperate in order to discuss doctrinal issues. For instance, in the first century, the church at Jerusalem met with the church at Antioch to discuss the doctrinal issue of Gentile conversion. How can Gentiles be saved? We can read about that, and we will, in Acts chapter 15, verses 1 through 6. And certain men came down from Judea and taught the brethren, unless you are circumcised according to the custom of Moses, you cannot be saved. Therefore, when Paul and Barnabas had no small dissension and dispute with them, they determined that Paul and Barnabas and certain others of them should go up to Jerusalem to the apostles and elders about this question. So they, being sent on their way by the church, they passed through Phoenicia and Samaria, describing the conversion of the Gentiles, and they caused great joy to all the brethren. And when they had come to Jerusalem, they were received by the church and the apostles and the elders, and they reported all things that God had done with them. But some of the sect of the Pharisees who believed rose up, saying, it is necessary to circumcise them and to command them to keep the law of Moses. Now the apostles and elders came together to consider this matter. And the result of that associational meeting, you can read in the rest of the book of Acts, chapter 15. And we talked about that a little bit in past lessons. But today we're just going to move on, and we're going to talk about some early associations, early Baptist associations. And we'll start by talking about British Baptists, because they were here first, of course. The first modern association formed in 1644, and it formed with 7 particular Baptist churches that met in London. Now, let me remind you that a particular Baptist church is a church that believes that we are predestined to be saved or to be lost. That is, before the foundation of the world, God chose who would be saved and who would be lost, and you have nothing whatsoever to do about it. Okay? That's what a particular Baptist church is. And we're going to talk about that doctrine of predestination and election next time. But for now, just know that 7 particular Baptist churches met in London and formed the first modern association. The reason that they met was because outsiders had accused them of heresy. They wanted to prove that their doctrine was biblically based, and so they sat down and they wrote out 53 articles of faith and posted those to prove that their opinions were not heretical. In 1655, a very important association formed known as the Midland Association. Now, I suppose all associations that form are important, especially to the churches that form them, but this is very significant for a reason I'm going to tell you in a minute. They met in Warwick, England, 1655, and they defined the role of an association. So they said this is why churches should combine. Number one, to give advice to other churches, to each other. Number two, to relieve the poor. And number three, to maintain doctrinal purity. The reason why they are significant is because this association still exists. As of 2020, they are still there. And they've changed their name, so it's a little hard to find them, but if you look up the Heart of England Baptist Association on the internet, you can read all about them. That's the Heart of England Baptist Association, formed in 1655. The First General Assembly of London is an association that was founded in 1689. Their purpose was to finance missions and to supplement the salaries of pastors of churches that were too small to be able to support them full time. Let's move from British associations now to American associations, and they resulted from an explosion of Baptist churches on the continent. In 1780, there were only 58 churches in America, but by 1786, there were 135. In 1790, there were 868 churches in America, and by 1836, they had mushroomed into 7,299 churches in America. Now, I find that figure real curious because it's 7,299, not 7,300, not 7,000, but it's right down to the final church, 7,299. Baptists can be real particular about their figures. Associations began to spring up in response to the churches. In 1800, there were 48 Baptist associations, but by 1880, there were 1,005 Baptist associations. The first American Baptist Association was founded in Philadelphia in 1707, and there were only 5 churches in that affiliation. However, whether it's 5,000, 5, or 2, as in Jerusalem and Antioch, when churches get together, they formed an association. They issued a doctrinal statement, and they planned for the expansion of church work. They financed local ministries, they began a Baptist college, and they planned for worldwide mission work. Up to now, we've just had local associations in local geographical areas, but the very first national association of churches was begun in 1814. And it was called, it's kind of wordy, but people were wordy in those days, the American Baptist Foreign Missions Society. And it was founded to fund missionaries. In particular, 2 missionaries, Luther Rice and Adoniram Judson. Perhaps you've heard of Adoniram Judson or Luther Rice. They're very important missionaries in American history. But they also did something else at this associational meeting, something that many associations have followed since. Of course, it's not mandatory to do what they said because all Baptist churches are independent of one another, and all associations are composed of independent churches, but they set a precedent in saying that there should be 3 levels of associations: national, which was new, state, and local. Now, in the BMAA, the Baptist Missionary Association of America, that Central Baptist Church is a part of, we have a national association. We also have a state association. We belong to the Arkansas State Association. Texas has state associations, Mississippi has state associations, lots of different associations in lots of different states. And we have a local association as well, as do many churches are part of local associations. They also form 3 departments. Departments are entities within the association that operate under the guidance and control of churches. So they form 3. They formed a publications department, which oversaw printed material like Sunday school books and things like that. They founded a home missions department that assisted in the placing of missionaries in local areas, and foreign missions. Around this time, America entered into a very dark period. This period was a period of the Civil War. For hundreds of years, there had been slaves throughout the American continent and throughout the world, and different governments and different peoples were beginning to doubt whether it was moral. This was also true in the United States of America. And it was true among Baptists. Some Baptists thought that slavery was moral, and some thought it was an affront to God. Because of this discussion and this disagreement over the morality of slavery, the Foreign Mission Society split. They split over slavery. And let me tell you how they did it, okay? A man by the name of James E. Reeve was nominated as a missionary. And on his application, it specified that he was a slave owner. There had never been a slave owner nominated and elected as a missionary in this society. This was a test case. This man was put forth as a missionary in order to force the association to rule on whether or not slavery was moral. And the association did rule, but not according to the way that they thought that they would. They said, we reject his application. Not because he's a slave owner, or not for any other reason except this. It's not a legitimate application. He was only nominated in order to force us to give an opinion on slavery. And then they went on and they said, we are an association. We are not ruling over churches. We don't tell churches what to do and what to believe. And so we do not have the authority to rule on the morality of slavery. Later on, though, they did say that they never would elect anybody to mission work that owned slaves, but that's a little bit deeper than we're going to go today. Just know that this divided the association, the society. So in 1845, at the 1845 meeting, the association split. And it split along geographical lines. The southern churches and the northern churches. Now, of course, there were exceptions, but generally speaking, the southern churches split off and said, we're not going to condemn slavery. And they became what's known today as the Southern Baptist Convention. The northern churches said, we do condemn slavery, it's wrong, and we don't want to have anything to do with it. They became the Northern Baptist Society, and they changed their name 2 or 3 times since, but they still exist today. And of course, so does the Southern Baptist Convention. So let's look at the Southern Baptist Convention and today's associations. By the end of the Civil War, 1865, the Southern Baptist Convention was broke. Many of its churches had been destroyed. They couldn't pay the salary of any missionaries or any associational workers. In fact, they suspended all work. And all 150 of their home missions had either been destroyed or, in their words, impaired. But they did survive, as you well know. The Southern Baptist Convention is a very powerful and large organization right now. but they began to establish a different form of government. They established what's known as a convention-style government, a convention-style business model. Now there's a lot involved in this, but let me just give you a couple of things and you'll get the idea. In a convention, the board of the convention manages business. The board dismisses missionaries when it feels like it should, and churches give a certain amount of money, whatever money that they want to be part of the convention. You have to give some money to the convention or you're not a convention church. However, the more money a church gives, the more votes the churches get when they have the convention meetings. And all churches get some vote, but the larger churches that can give more money get more votes. Now, at first that might seem unfair, and maybe it is, but I want you to realize that a larger church can give more money because it has more members. And so the idea is that the more members that a church has, of course you should have more of a vote because they represent more Christians. Associations, on the other hand, say that all churches are equal and each church should have the same amount of votes. Now some associations, I don't know how many votes that they get, but I know that the Baptist Missionary Association of America, each church gets up to 3 votes. And no church gets more than 3 votes. And I'll talk about how you get those votes in a minute. Also in an association, the churches approve or disapprove the work of the association. And so the churches actually vote on whether to elect missionaries or dismiss missionaries. It's all the work of the churches. The American Baptist Association formed because it split from the Southern Baptist Convention. Several churches got together and they began to doubt the validity of the convention-style business, and they decided that they would split off of the Southern Baptist Convention. Their rationale was that the convention is ruling the churches because the convention is operating independent of the will of some of the churches and independent of the vote of the churches. The convention, they said, is just supposed to be a tool of the churches. So the churches left and they formed their own association in 1905 and called it the General Association of Baptists USA. Meanwhile, in Texas, a group of Texas churches who had split from the Southern Baptist Convention decided that they would want to join the ABA, the American Baptist Association as it is now known, in 1924. And so they joined together and formed the ABA, curiously, in Texarkana, Texas, in 1924. Now, I'm standing in Texarkana, Arkansas, but if you're familiar with Texarkana, it's kind of hard to be one or the other. You're pretty much both. Anyway, 1924, Texarkana, and their headquarters are still here today, by the way. Baptist Missionary Association of America, well, it's Baptist Missionary Association of America, typically referred to as BMAA, but there's really 2 A's at the end of that, was formed from a split from the ABA in 1950. And it occurred because of something that I like to call the Battle of the Messengers. The Battle of the Messengers took place in the 1949 National Meeting. And here was the issue. The issue was, must messengers that vote, that represent churches, must those messengers be a member of that church? In other words, if our church only is allowed 3 messengers, do all 3 of those messengers have to be members of our church? Now let me explain what messengers are. And I'll explain it from the Baptist Missionary Association perspective because that's what I know about. Every year at the National Association, churches get together and they vote on different things. Who should be the president of a college, who should be the head of missions and things like that. Which missionary should we elect? And each church gets 3 votes. Those 3 votes are cast by messengers. The church elects up to 3 messengers to send to the association. And when they get there, those 3 messengers are supposed to vote the will of the church. Some issues have already been decided, and the church has already instructed the messengers how to do it, and some issues have not yet been decided, and so they're trusting the messengers to do the will of the church. However, at this time, there were messengers that were not members of of the church that they represented. And so the issue was, is that legal? Is that right? And there was a lot of discussion about it. And of course, they couldn't decide that issue because it was a brand new issue, so they said, let's send it back to the churches, and each individual church can decide how to answer this question, and they can send their response with the messenger next year. And so the churches of the association individually voted, and the next year, 1950, they were to report the results of the vote. But at the 1950 meeting, the association was seemingly ignoring that vote because they proceeded with the election of officers. And so a pastor by the name of John Duggar stood up and asked that we wait to take the vote and election of personnel until we've heard the results of the church's vote from last year. He reasoned that if we don't find out how the church has voted, then we don't know who's legitimately allowed to be a messenger, because some of the messengers might be not members of the churches that they represent, and so on. His motion was denied, and he was frustrated along with 463 churches. And those 463 churches left the ABA and formed the Baptist Missionary Association of America. Baptists fight. Baptists fight like family fight, but they still love one another because they're still family. We're all part of the family of God. Today, associational work is still strong among Baptists. In fact, there are 31 national Baptist associations, conventions, groups in America today, representing 50 million Baptists in the United States. Now, next time, we're going to talk about predestination and election and those particular Baptist churches that keep cropping up. And we're going to answer the question, or at least I'm going to give you my opinion, did God determine before the foundation of the world who would be saved and who would be lost? Thank you for listening. May God bless you.